about to learn the last Mishnah in Shekalim. We make a Siyum. Those who want to have a Meseches or L'chaim ready, have Meseches, L'chaim ready. Perek Ches, Mishnah Ches, in your Shekalim Mishnayos, it begins on page 70. Now, we've been learning a lot of different halachas recently in Shekalim, and we've mentioned that it's gone from topic to topic to topic to topic to topic. We've been learning a lot of topics that are not directly related to Shekalim. And it began with the Mishnah that discussed what happens, and this was in the last Perek, in Perek Zayin, Mishnah Aleph, I'm all the way back on page 51. We learned that there are 13 shofaros in the Beis HaMikdash, 13 pushkas, and different monies went into each pushka. Someone finds money on the floor between the pushkas. What pushka does it belong to? You find a maktas hashekel on the floor between the two maktas hashekel pushkas. There were two maktas hashekel pushkas in the Beis HaMikdash. We learned about that. One is the new maktas hashekel that was donated for this year, and one is maktas hashekel that was for last year's donation. You find a maktas hashekel on the floor between the two maktas hashekel pushkas. Which one do you put it back into? From there, we went to all kinds of halachas. If someone finds a behema, if someone finds meat on the floor in the Beis HaMikdash, what is it? Is it kat Shekalim? Is it kat Shekadashim? Then when someone finds a live animal between Yerushalayim and Migdal Eder, what should he do with the animal? From there, we went to all kinds of takanas that Chazal made about how to spend money in the Beis HaMikdash. Then we went back to the streets of Yerushalayim. If you find saliva in the streets of Yerushalayim, is it tamei or is it tar? From there we went to if you find vessels in the street of Yerushalayim, tamei tar. From there we went, what happens if you find a knife, a shechting knife in the streets of Yerushalayim, Erev Pesach? Can you use that knife to shech the korban Pesach? From there we went, what happens if the paroiches becomes tamei? From there we went to a Mishnah that talks about the way they weave the paroiches. From there, we went to the halacha on page 69 about kachim that became tamei. Where do you burn the meat of a korban that became tamei? Then we went to Mishnah Zayin and continued talking about the meat of an animal that's tamei. Now we come to Mishnah Ches. Mishnah Ches is going to open a sugya that if you only learned Mishnah Shekalim, you're going to ask yourself, what in the world is it doing here? Because it has absolutely no connection to anything we've been talking about now. And Me'etz Hashem, I'll read to you the Tiferes Yisrael on the Mishnah. Tiferes Yisrael says, I have no idea what this Mishnah is doing here. So if you learn Shekalim in isolation, you will see that this Mishnah is not connected to anything. But because we had the zchus to learn Midos and Tamid, Midos, Tamid, Shekalim, we're going to have a very good understanding what this Mishnah is doing here. So we've been talking till now about a lot of different things that got lost in the Beis HaMikdash, things that got lost in Yerushalayim, meat that became Tamei. Fine. Mishnah Ches. Evarei HaTamid, the parts of the korban tamid. For this, we need to go back and learn Masech the Tamid. Rabbi Isai, how many lotteries were there in the Beis HaMikdash every day? 4. The first lottery was before dawn. Who wants to do the Trumas Hadeshim? The second lottery, and that first lottery had 1 winner. The second lottery had 13 winners. Who wants to shech the korban? Who wants to sprinkle the blood? Who wants to clean the mizbeach haktores? Who wants to clean the menorah? Those are the first 4. Then we had 6 Kohanim who took parts of the carbon tumid after it was slaughtered and brought it to the ramp of the Mizbeach and left it on the ramp. And then the Kohanim went to the Lishkas Hagazis and they read Kriya Shema and they daven, and then they came back out for the third lottery, which was who is going to take the parts of the animal that are on the ramp and bring them up to burn on the Mizbeach. And then there was the fourth lottery about who was going to bring the Ketoris. The second lottery dealt with who is going to take the parts of the carbon and bring it to the ramp. The third lottery was who's going to bring it up from the ramp to the top of the Mizbeach. At any rate, we know that after the carbon tumid in the morning and the carbon tumid in the afternoon was shechted, the parts were not taken immediately and burnt on the Mizbeach. They were first taken to the ramp. Certainly in the morning, they were taken to the ramp and left there. And then the Kohanim went and read Kriya Shema and daven, and then the third lottery for who's going to take the parts from the ramp to the top of the Mizbeach. Again, at any rate, these animal parts are on the ramp before they go up to the Mizbeach. The Mishnah now is going to tell us where these parts were placed on the ramp. Where would you have written this Mishnah if you were writing the Mishnah? This Mishnah belongs in Meseches Tamid. In Meseches Tamid, where the Mishnah was telling me all about the body parts of the animal that were brought to the ramp, and then after that they were brought from the ramp up to the Mizbeach, a Mishnah would have been written there that said, and the body parts that are brought to the ramp, this is where you put it on the ramp. Wasn't put into Meseches Tamid. It waited for the last Mishnah in Meseches Shekalim. So if you learn Meseches Shekalim in a vacuum, like, what is this doing here? What is the in Meseches Shekalim? Why am I being taught where to put the body parts of the carbon tumid? Who's talking about a carbon tumid? But for us, we understand that these three Mesechtes are interlocking. Mesechta Midos is a building of a Beis HaMikdash. Meseches Tamid is how to bring the carbon in the Beis HaMikdash. And Mesechta Shekalim tells you how to pay for the carbon Tamid that you're going to bring in the Beis HaMikdash. So what is it doing here? Of course it's doing here. This is the end of our whole discussion of Beis HaMikdash, carbon Tamid, and how to pay for the carbon Tamid. So in the Teferes Yisrael, the Teferes Yisrael writes, Loi Zachisi, it's not in your Mishnah, it's the Teferes Yisrael writes, Loi Zachisi, Leida Ech Shaykh Dinsel Kilkan. I have no idea why these rules of where to put the animal parts on the ramp. What is it doing here? It has no connection to anything here. This Mishnah should have been back in Meseches Tamid. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should enlighten our eyes to understand these kind of secrets of why these things are put in the places that they're put. For us, Baruch Hashem, this flows beautifully with Midos and Tamid. If you take a look at page 71, you have a picture of the Mizbeach. That's the Mizbeach we built in Mesechta Midos. So we're going to be looking at the Mizbeach we learned in Mesechta Midos, the body parts that we learned about in Mesechta Tamid, and now we're going to be told where on the Mizbeach that we learned about Mesechta Midos should we put the body parts that we learned in Mesechta Tamid. We're going to be taught on Mesechta Shekalim. The whole thing comes together in the last Mishnah of Shekalim. So the Mishnah says on page 70, Eivarei HaTamid, those parts of the carbon Tamid, Nitanim Mechatzi Kevesh Ulamata B'Mizrach. They are put at the bottom half of the ram on the eastern side of the ram. Okay, let's Here we are, Rabbi Isaac. Our beloved Mesechta Midos diagram 3. You walk in over here. It's not showing it. Shar HaMizrach, Shushan Habira. You walked into the Ezras Noshim. You took the 15 steps up to Shar Nicanor. Into Shar Nicanor, you're in Ezras Yisrael. There was a duchan here for the Levim to sing Shira. Ezras Yisrael, the Mizbeach. Here's the ram. This is the eastern side of the ram. This is the western side of the ram. The Mizbeach is 32 by 32. The ram is 32 in length. It goes from south towards north. Its length is 32 amos, and its width is 16. So the Mizbeach is 32. The ramp is 16, which means that there's an open portion to the western side of the ramp. And the eastern side of the ramp, each opening is 8 amos. 8, 16, 8 equals 32. So the ramp is 16 wide, and it's 32 high. So the Mishnah here says that after the korban was slaughtered, where was it slaughtered? Beis HaMitbachayim, the northern wall. They took the parts that had to be burnt on the Mizbeach, and first they brought them to the ram, those who won the lottery, the second lottery, and they put it, the Mishnah here says in Shekalim, halfway up the eastern side of the Mizbeach, of the ram. If the ramp is 32 amos long, halfway up is somewhere between 0 and 16. 16 to 32 is the upper half of the ramp. So they put it within the first 16 amos here, and they put it on the eastern side. What does the eastern side mean? If the width of the ramp is 16, 8 is considered the eastern side, 8 is considered the western side. So these parts of the korban tamid are going to be within 16 amos of the height of the ram, and within 8 amos of the width of the ram, and that's called the lower eastern side of the ram. So again, Mishnah Ches, Eivari HaTamid, the parts of the tamid, the limbs of the tamid, Nitonin Mechatzi Kevesh Ulamata Bamizrach. They were put on the lower half of the ram towards the eastern side. Now you can ignore picture 97. The reason I'm telling you to ignore picture 97 is if you look in the Rav on page 70, the left-hand column, the Rav says, Mechatzi hakevesh ulamata b'mayrav. There's a big machlokes what the proper girsa is in the Mishnah. Does the Mishnah say Mizrach or does the Mishnah say Mayrav? Our printing has Mizrach, and many printings have Mizrach. The Rav's girsa was Mayrav. So he has the body parts, lower half, western side. We're going to go with the way the Mishnah is printed now, Mishnayos. It's, if you look at picture 97 on page 71, you have to imagine the body parts are on the other side. So instead of the body parts being here, the body parts are here. This is the picture for the Rav, lower western side. These body parts would be for us lower eastern side. V'shel Musafim, and Shabbos and Yontif, when there's a korban musaf, Nitonin Mechatzi Kevesh Ulamata B'mayra. Those parts of the korban musaf would be put on the lower half of the ram and on the western side. So if you look at picture 98, you have this is now a picture we can use. The eastern side of the ram have the Eivorei Tamid. The western side of the ram have the limbs of the korban musaf of Shabbos or Yontif. This doesn't include Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh is going to have its own rule in a moment. So the limbs, the body parts of the animal were first placed on the lower half of the ram to the eastern side, if it was a carbon tamid, the lower half of the ram to the western side, if it was a carbon musaf. Page 72, V'shal Roshei Chodashim, and the carbon musaf of Rosh Chodesh, Nitanim mitachas karkuv hamizbeach melamat. And here too, there are multiple girsois on what the Mishnah says. You can see it even in your Mishnah on page 72 on the second line. There's a parenthesis that has other words put into it. We're going to learn the Rambam. We're going to learn the Mishnah simply like the Rambam, not like picture 99 necessarily. What we learned about the Mizbeach, if you take a look at picture 99, we learned that the Mizbeach was built in parts. Part 1, they filled it with rock. Then they put part 2 on it, they filled it with rock. Finally, you get to the top part of the Mizbeach, and this is called Mokum Hiluch HaKohanim. Between each of these karnos, between each of these corners, you have this little protrusion at the top of the Mizbeach, that's a keren. Between each of these karnos, there was a place, this is designated place for the Kohanim to be able to walk. Somewhere around here, they would put the animal parts of a carbon for Rosh Chodesh, the Rosh Chodesh carbon. Now why? Rosh Chodesh is a carbon musaf. The Yontif carbon musaf, the Shabbos carbon musaf, they put on the lower half of the ram to the west. But the carbon musaf of Rosh Chodesh, they put on the top of the Mizbeach. Why did they put the carbon musaf of Rosh Chodesh on top of the Mizbeach? So Mefarshim tell us that hard for us to appreciate today because each of us has a pocket calendar. And those of us who have their pocket calendars and their phones or whatever gadgets you have, people have pocket calendars. And we know when Rosh Chodesh is. In the time of the Beis HaMikdash, people didn't know when Rosh Chodesh is, and that's why there was a problem with the whole designation of when Rosh Chodesh is, and did they get the message quick enough to Yidden who lived in Chutz La'aretz, and that's why in Chutz La'aretz they had to keep 2 days Yontif because they didn't know when Yontif was. When Rosh Chodesh is, and getting the message out to all of Klal Yisrael, and there were all different types of ways they tried to communicate. At one point, they went to the top of mountains and did the fire signals, then they had to stop that. Smoke signals. This was a constant problem. How do you get the word out to all of Klal Yisrael that today's Rosh Chodesh? If today's Rosh Chodesh, they need to start counting today towards Pesach, towards Sukkot, towards Shavuos, so there's issues about how to announce Rosh Chodesh. And so they were always looking for ways to be able to publicize Rosh Chodesh. They were always looking for ways to publicize Rosh Chodesh. One of the ways to publicize Rosh Chodesh was people who came in and out of the Beis HaMikdash. Besides the Kohanim, Jews coming into the Beis HaMikdash, they would see in the morning that the carbon, that there are body part, that there are animal parts that usually are on the rim. Why are they now on the top of the Mizbeach? That's a signal it's Rosh Chodesh. That's one of the ways that they signaled it's Rosh Chodesh. You walked in the Beis HaMikdash, you saw animal parts towards the top of the Mizbeach and not on the rim. Boom, signal today's Rosh Chodesh. That was another system of declaring Rosh Chodesh. And now to close the Masechta with some Shekalim. So the Mishnah goes back to Shekalim. Hashkalim v'habikuvim ein nogim ela b'fnei habayis. The giving of Shekalim and the bringing of bikurim, those first fruits that come off the tree that you bring to Yerushalayim, that beautiful mitzvah of bikurim, ein nogim ela b'fnei habayis. Those are mitzvahs that can only be done when the Beis HaMikdash is standing. The purpose of Shekalim is to be able to purchase animals for karbonis in the Beis Hamikdash and for additional direct needs of the Beis Hamikdash that we learned about. Nebuch, there's no Beis Hamikdash, there's no Matzah HaShekel to be given. So there's no mitzvah of Matzah HaShekel when there's no Beis Hamikdash. There's no mitzvah of Bikurim when there's no Beis Hamikdash, because the Torah says, you shall bring your Bikurim, Beis Hashem Elokecha. You shall bring it to God's house. Nebuch, there's no Beis Hamikdash, there's no place to bring Bikurim. The mitzvah of Bikurim does not apply when there's no Beis Hamikdash. Aval Meiser Dogon. However, the mitzvah of Truma and Meiser, it doesn't say in the pasuk that you have to bring the Truma to the Beis Hamikdash, and it doesn't say you have to bring your Meiser to the Beis Hamikdash. It says who you give it to. If it doesn't say where you bring it. By Bikurim, it says, bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, no Beis Hamikdash, Nebuch, no Bikurim. Trumas or Maisers, it doesn't say a geographic location. It says who to give it to. So therefore, Trumas and Meiser, those halachas remain mitzvahs, even when there's no Beis Hamikdash. Now, this is a very complex set of halachas l'maisa. What part of Eretz Yisrael today is, if you take a look at the Rav, the top of page 73, the right-hand column, Nogim b'fnei habayis. Nogim bein b'fnei habayis, bein shlo b'fnei habayis. Why? The Kedushas ha'oretz loy batla. This is a machlokes in the Gemara. There are all kinds of shittas. It's a very complex sugya. It's a sugya in Megillah. It's a sugya in Shavuos. It's a sugya in other places, Yavamis. Whether once Eretz Yisrael became sanctified through the presence of the Jewish people entering in the days of Yoshua ben Nun, that Eretz Yisrael remains sanctified permanently, so that even after Jews were exiled, and even when there's no Beis Hamikdash, there's an inherent Kedusha to the land, and therefore you still have to give Truma and Meiser. Or is it that after Jews are exiled and no longer are in Eretz Yisrael, the Kedusha is not there, and therefore the laws of Truma and Meiser are not there? And all these kind of shilas come up also for Shemitah. Is Shemitah bisman hazeh, is Shemitah today, when there's no Beis Hamikdash, a biblical requirement or a rabbinic requirement? Why do we keep Shemitah today? There's no Beis Hamikdash. So that will be near to get to. But here the Mishnah says, Aval Meiser Dogan u'Meiser Behema, Trumas and Meisers that you give from grains, and Meiser Behema was every 10th animal that's born that year becomes Meiser. And you have to take it to the Beis Hamikdash, you have to take it to Yerushalayim, and it belongs to the owner, the Meiser Behema, just like Meiser Sheni. But he has to take it to Yerushalayim, the 10th animal. He has all his newborn animals in a corral, and he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Meiser Behema. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 Meiser Behema. So if he has 100 animals, he's going to have 10 Meiser Behema animals. He's going to bring them to Yerushalayim to eat. Meiser Behema also is noheg bisman hazeh. We'll talk about that in a moment. V'habachoros, the firstborn of a kosher animal, is also noheg bisman hazeh. A bechor goes to the kohen. Meiser Behema belongs to the owner, and he brings it to Yerushalayim to eat there. A bechor goes to Eliezer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. But bechor goes to the kohen. So the Mishnah says these 3 mitzvahs nogim bein b'fnei habayis, bein shelo b'fnei habayis. Truma Meiser of grain, the 10th of every animal, and the newborn of the kosher animal. Even if there's no Beis Hamikdash, you have to do those mitzvahs. Okay, so Trumas and Meisers we discussed for a moment. Meiser Behema, Chazal made a rule that there's no Meiser Behema bisman hazeh. You don't have to do this mitzvah. They made a rule. Why? Because if that mitzvah remained intact, this is not a mitzvah that you give something to a Kohen. This is Lubling. If Lubling had a farm and he had newborn 1,000 goats, so he would have to take 100 goats to Yerushalayim and eat it in Yerushalayim, and now try to figure out how Lubling's going to do that properly. You have all kinds of laws of Yerushalayim, you have all kinds of laws of Tum and Tahara. And on top of that, until you take it to Yerushalayim, you're not allowed to use these animals. You can't work them, you can't shear them, you can't do anything. Chazal realized that this kind of mitzvah, which is for every yid, and is very pervasive. Everybody's going to have newborn animals. It's impossible to be shomer it properly when there's no Beis Hamikdash with Tumma and Tahara and all the halachas that are taught and well known. So they said, Bisman Hazeh, you do not do Meiser. There's no Kedusha of Meiser Behema. There is still Kedushas Bechor, and that is taken care of through the halachas of Bechor, how you deal with it, Bisman Hazeh. Okay, so Meiser, Shumas and Meisers are noyeg, Bisman Hazeh. Meiser Behema is noheg, but Chachamim said we're not doing it anymore. Bechor, firstborn of a kosher animal, is noheg, Bisman Hazeh. Last halacha of Meseches Shekalim. Hamakdish Shekalim ubikurim, harei zeh kodesh. Today, there's no Beis Hamikdash Nebuch. It should be built today, mamish. Somebody says, this money is machzis hashekel money. Does that money have any kedusha to it? We said that there is no mitzvah today to separate a machzis hashekel, but someone goes along and comes along and he takes money, he says, this is going to be designated for machzis hashekel money. So the first sheet in the Mishnah says, harei zeh kodesh. It gets the holiness of machzis hashekel, and what you have to do with it is basically destroy it, because there's no Beis Hamikdash to give it to. You can maybe put it away, but this is a problem that a person brought upon himself. He made something kadosh, and he can't give it to the Beis Hamikdash, and there's a problem about how to handle it. The point of the Mishnah here is that it does have a kedusha. Ubikurim, somebody picks some pomegranates from his tree, olives from his tree, and he says, this is going to be bikurim. There's no Beis Hamikdash, there's no requirement to bring bikurim. But the person said the words. Do those pomegranates and dates actually become holy with kedushas bikurim? The first opinion of the Mishnah says, harei zeh kodesh, it is kodesh. Now what are you going to do with it? Bikurim have to be brought to the Beis Hamikdash, and they have to be given to the Kohen. There's no Beis Hamikdash. What are you going to do? So again, these Bikurim would have to basically be destroyed in specific halachic ways. These are not the smartest things to do because we have no way of fulfilling the mitzvah properly. So by being a big grace at tzaddik and saying these pomegranates are Bikurim, you create a self-inflicted problem. But the Mishnah is just telling you that the person that utters the words can bring kedusha on the money for machzis hashekel and can bring kedushas bikurim. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, ha'omer bikurim kodesh, einam kodesh. Rabbi Shimon says nothing doing. If a person says that these pomegranates and dates are kodesh, there is no kedusha. Even if you say the words, it means nothing. There's no Beis Hamikdash, there's no Kohen that we can properly give it to, so uttering the words doesn't make anything kodesh. Does Rabbi Shimon hold the same thing by Shekalim? We had two cases. Somebody says this money is machzis hashekel. The first opinion of the Mishnah is that it got kedushas machzis hashekel. The person said these dates and pomegranates are bikurim, it gets kedushas bikurim. The first opinion of the Mishnah had two cases, Shekalim and Bikurim. Rabbi Shimon came and only seems to argue about Bikurim. He says, if you say this is Bikurim, it's not Bikurim and it's not Kodesh. Does not mean that he agrees that if you say this is machzis hashekel money, it is, or does he disagree with Maktas HaShekel as well? That is a machlokes as to what Rabbi Shimon means. And as you can see at the bottom of the Rav on page 73, the right-hand corner, the very bottom of the Rav, v'halacha k'Rebbi Shimon. The halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. Someone says this is bikurim when there's no Beis Hamikdash, it has no kedushas bikurim. If a person says this is Maktas HaShekel when there's no Beis Hamikdash, logically Rabbi Shimon would also say it is not Maktas HaShekel either. Okay, so that brings us to the end of Meseches Shekalim. We didn't learn the Meseches itself. There's a Yushalmi, there's a Gemara Shekalim. There's no Babylonian Talmud on Shekalim, but there is Yushalmi on Shekalim. So we'll say, without Shem or Malchus, we'll say the Hadran for learning the Mishnayos as we learned it with a bit of Iyun. So say the Hadran. Hadran Allah Meseches Shekalim v'Hadroch Alon Daitach Allah Meseches Shekalim v'Daitach Alon Lo Nesnashi Minach Meseches Shekalim Lo Nesnashi Minon Lo Baal Mahadein Lo Baal Medasi. Hadran Allah Meseches Shekalim v'Hadroch Alon Daitach Allah Meseches Shekalim v'Daitach Alon Lo Nesnashi Minach Meseches Shekalim Lo Nesnashi Minon Lo Baal Mahadein Lo Baal Medasi. Hadran Allah Meseches Shekalim v'Hadroch Alon Daitach Allah Meseches Shekalim v'Daitach Alon This is a prayer. We're talking to Meseches Shekalim. Meseches Shekalim, I won't forget you, and please you don't forget me. Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosseinu, shetei Torascha u'menasseinu b'olam hazeh, u'tei imanu l'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Romi bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achoy bar Papa, Memori bar Papa, Rafam bar Papa, Rochesh bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Dor bar Papa. Harav no Hashem Elokeinu stivei Torascha b'finu fias Abba Beis Yisrael. V'nir kulanu Nachman v'tzetzeinu v'tzetzei amcha Beis Yisrael. Kol yoydei shemecha v'lomdei sarasecha. Me'evaytech hakmein v'tzetzech ki loylam hili. Yili b'sam hukech l'man lo evosh. Loylam la'eshkach b'dak yivam ki yisani. Baruch atah Hashem. L'amdeini hukecha amin, 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 celebrate. Moidim anachnu l'fanecha Hashem Elokeinu l'kei avosseinu. Shesamtech l'keinu miyosh beis hamedrash l'samtech l'keinu miyosh v'kronis. She'anu mashkim v'heim mashkim. Anu mashkim l'divrei Torah. V'heim mashkim l'dvarim b'telim. Anu amelim v'heim amelim. Anu amelim l'kal m'schar. V'heim amelim v'einu l'kal m'schar. Anu rotzim v'heim rotzim. Anu rotzim l'chayei ha'olam haba. V'heim rotzim l'ber shachas. Shnema v'ato Elohim toridem l'ber shachas an shidom mimel yachzu yimei v'aniach nachbach. V'yotzom l'fnech Hashem Elokai k'shem Hashem Elokeinu k'shem she'azartonu l'sayim Meseches Shekalim kein ta'azreinu l'hasnu Mesech l'zisvorim achayim u'l'saymom u'l'model u'lamei l'shmo v'l'asos l'kaim es kol divrei Talmud Torah secha b'ahava. Uzchus kol atanoim v'amaroim v'talmidei chachomim yamoid lanu u'lezarenu u'lezer zarenu shlosomas ha'toyer mipinu mipi zarenu pi zer zarenu ad olam v'seskayim bonu v'shalecha tancha oischa v'shachbucha tishmo alecha v'hakitzoyse hisa sichecha ki v'yirbu yamecha v'yasifu lecha shneis chayim arach yom mimina v'semoyla oisha v'chavoid adinoi ois lamoy yitain Adonai Yivarech es amoy v'asholoi. Mazel tov.
Mazel tov. Mazel tov.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. V'yirei minei Messiah.
Story of Melech or the story of Yaakov Avinu. It's not going to be chronological like that. So we're going to have to see how to sort of organize the facts that we have on the ground. And
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam v'yirei pri hagefen.
Amen.
is that there are certain pieces in Ezra
L'chaim l'chaim tov shalom.
Hi, Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov.
Mazel tov. Mazel
All
tov.
you need the chumash and the chumash. All you need brachas. You get all the brachas that the Rebbeinu Shalom can give. All good the brachas. All Yeshuas, the chumash, brachas, refuahs come to Rebbeinu Shalom, and we should be zoicha to be a skoil tzedek. We did an unbelievable thing. The chevra here, what we remember, what we don't remember, we need to review. Built a Beis Hamikdash in Masechta Midas, learned how to bring the Korban Tamid in the Beis Hamikdash, learned how to pay for the Beis Hamikdash and how to bring the Korban Masechta Shekalim. For those of you who want to take a test, for those of you who like tests. So the Mishnah Behira that we've been using for Masechta Shekalim, every Masechta, there is a lot of Mishnah Behiras on different Masechtas. As I mentioned, there's one on Shavias. At the end of every Masechta of Mishnah Behira, there's a test. First of all, if you want to review the whole Masechta, the Masechta is summarized in charts.
Excuse me, Rabbi Lubling.
Page 74,
Rabbi
you
Lubling.
have the charts that summarize the Masechta.
Excuse me, Rabbi Lubling.
Then, after you finish reviewing your charts and you know the Masechta, at the end, they call it again page 1. You have a test on every perek so that you can test your knowledge of how well you learned Masechta Shekalim. Okay. Each of you have at the end of your Mishnayos charts to review the whole Masechta, and then you have a bechina, a test, so you can take that test.
Going forward. Right? Now, open up your chat box for a second. Wait, I have a couple of questions, sorry. During the 8 days of Ezra Nehemiah, did we already consider one Jewish only if their mother was Jewish? Lisa, no, that is really important. And we're going
Rabbi Lubling.
Mazel tov to everybody. It's been, we started after Pesach, and now we're moving towards Hanukkah. And I think it's an amazing accomplishment for each one of you. You should all be incredibly proud of your ability to spend the time and keep up with it. And it's an opportunity now that we've done this. Go back and review. Take your Mishnayos, and thank you, Mazel Tov. Take your Mishnayos, but go back to Masechta Midos with all your pictures. Even if you don't remember everything, just even fly through it. So you can remember the Harabah is 500 by 500, the Ezra's Nashim 135 by 135, 15 steps to get to Sha'ar Nikanor, Ezra's Yisrael, Ezra's Kohanim, the Heichel, the Ulam. Just run through it with the pictures and then go through Masechta Tamid. We had that beautiful Masechta Tamid with all the pictures in it. Run through, just read it, run through it, look at the pictures, it'll remind you, then run through Masechta Shekalim, so that stays with you. And that's the prayer we said after, we say after a Siyum that we said today. We don't want to forget, and the Masechta shouldn't forget. All l'chaim, chaim tom shalom. Thank you for keeping up. Thank you for participating. A tremendous zechus. Be zoicha to begin more Masechtas, finish more Masechtas, to become Oivdei Hashem in its truest sense, and from there we'll be able to bring the Gilui Hayichud Bias Mashiach Tzidkeinu l'chaim.
Chaim, l'chaim.
Yosef, are you there? Yosef Simons, are you there?
He's there, but I don't.
Okay, Yosef, your bottle of wine that you brought me a little while back, that's the bottle we used to make the l'chaim.